Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Damien O'Connor,
Thank you, Mr.
member for
Speaker.
the West Coast.
Thank you. It is with a sad heart that I stand to speak on this bill, but it is also with some relief, because I say to Bill Brazel, who will be up there somewhere looking down, who spoke to me in 1994, who said profound words that post the deregulation of mining regulations, of health and safety regulations in 1992, that we were destined to repeat the tragedies of the past because we'd stepped back from prescriptive mine regulations developed over 100 years of tragedies internationally, picking up the wisdom from each and every one of those tragedies into a set of regulations that took the best of international knowledge in an attempt to protect workers who were always and are always working in a unique and usually quite risky environment. Mr. Speaker, I say to Bill, well, we've finally made the progress that you spoke of. To Tim Hicks, another mine union delegate who I worked with, not in a mine but prior to that, whose death was commemorated 10 years ago last weekend, someone who knew of the dangers, who was passionate about driving change, but unfortunately whose life was taken from him, unfortunately before he could make real progress. Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill. It's not perfect, and I'm sure the Select Committee will deal with it appropriately. There are lessons for each and every one of us in the passage of this legislation. For politicians, it's a lesson for us on all sides of the House, that when we receive advice from officials, we have a responsibility to ask the hard questions. It's not good enough just to accept that advice and move on, Mr. Speaker. And if we think there may be something wrong or some deficiency in that advice, then pursue it. And I say to the ministers over on the House, the other side of the House there now, that heed my words, not because I'm full of all wisdom, but because of personal experience, because of watching this sad process since 1992, where minister after minister has refused to accept the wisdom from people at the coalface, literally, has accepted the advice of people sitting on their asses in Wellington. Yes, and I say it with a little bit of anger, because that's exactly what they were doing, making judgments on what was right and what was not right for the safety of people working underground. And it's time we brought check inspectors back in, and people who at the coalface know what is dangerous and what is not people sitting on their butts in Wellington. And that's what the deregulation brought to the coal mining industry, Mr. Speaker. It's a lesson for officials. Officials work under pressure. They don't always have the resources. And so sometimes they make up advice on the best of their hints or preconceived notions. Mr. Speaker, it's not good enough. If officials know that they don't have the proper resources to make and provide the proper advice, then they too have to speak up, because that's exactly what was happening here, Mr. Speaker. Officials sought advice from the big coal miner, Solid Energy, over a number of years. The big coal miner wanted to get on, change the culture in the mining industry, get rid of all the old unionists, all the old miners who had the knowledge, and get a new breed of young, keen, energetic miners who were prepared to work for bonuses, who were prepared to forgo some of the lessons of the past in order to get the coal out of the ground. Mr. Speaker, the lessons for the officials are: ask more than just the mining companies for advice. Seek advice from everywhere you can. Mr. Speaker, for company directors, there's a lesson here. You may flit around from one company to another, pollinating the advice from one sector to another. Being an independent corporate director is a great honour in this country. Well, with it comes responsibility. And the people who went on to that company, Pike River, looking to get a good return for the investors, Mr. Speaker, they had a responsibility to make sure that the investment was sound, not just for return to investors, but for each and every person involved in that project. They did not. My colleague Andrew Little has taken initiative to try and address that. Mr. Speaker, the lesson for company directors is ask more than just the CEO. Ask the people at the coalface. Ask the people in the company what's going on and take responsibility for your investment and your job. Mr. Speaker, the lesson for the miners, their enthusiasm to work with one another in risky environments, to get on and do the job, to grow the project, to deliver incomes for their families, incomes for their mates, and income for the community, is something we must respect. But it should not be at the expense of safety. Safety should never be compromised. Some of those miners knew that things weren't right. They were concerned about jobs for their mates. They were concerned about incomes for their own families. And so sometimes, as human nature does, they overlooked the obvious. With best intents, they ignored some of the lessons of the past and some of the wisdom that was surrounding them, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure there'll be many miners, not just the ones at Pike River, but in fact those at Spring Creek, where the mine was shut down for effectively 6 months after the Pike River disaster, because it too was unsafe. Mr. Speaker, we have to take the lessons from the past and not forget them. For the community, Mr. Speaker, for the people on the West Coast, sometimes we place too great a weight on the individuals who go and earn the jobs to provide the income, to provide the secondary businesses and a nice, healthy, vibrant community. We place upon their shoulders a huge responsibility, and the miners feel that. And so perhaps we in the community expected too much of them, knowing full well, in the case of Pike River, that this was a high-risk environment and that relying on an unregulated health and safety system was not good enough, because human nature and commercial drivers will fail us time and time again. We know that. I don't think anyone in this House wants to bring in legislation or regulation unnecessarily. We do it for good reason most of the time. We do it to protect ourselves from others, protect ourselves from ourselves, to try and have a community and a working environment that is safe and that can allow people who go to work to go home at night and look after their families. The legislation changed in 1992 by a national government that was determined to deregulate anything it could get its hands on was a failure, was irresponsible. And in fact, we've seen over many years deregulation being called the panacea to all economic woes, the way forward. Well, this was a sad and tragic experiment. I acknowledge the work and the commitment by this national government to put back into place some prescriptive legislation for underground coal mining. It is necessary. Bill Brazel told me that in 1994. He was right. I take some responsibility. Should I have shouted and screamed from the rooftops? Should I have marched in the streets to get the legislation changed? Perhaps I should have. Mr. Speaker, but it's incumbent upon this House here, each and every one of us, to not buy into this ideology that says less regulations, hands-off government, hands-off regulation is going to protect each and every one of us. There are some people who work in risky environments. There are some people who are less able than others, who need protection. It is the responsibility of this House, of any government, to put in place those necessary protections. Mr. Speaker, today we're introducing into the House Health and Safety Pike River Implementation Bill. Can I acknowledge Bernie Monk, Nick Davidson, the families and the people who were determined to push ahead, to have a proper inquiry, to understand what went on here and then to ensure change occurred. This is the start of that change and we commit to follow it through for better mining safety.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member, Kevin Haig.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.